Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentour and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, we're going to be talking about a flight where things go really wrong really quickly. We're going to be talking about an uncontained engine failure that cascades into hundreds of different system anomalies and how the knowledge and CRM and airmanship of the flight crew saves the day. We're going to be talking about Qantas Flight 32, so stay tuned.
Wind 31016, we're on right, we're on right. Clear to land 31 right.
Delta 260, yes, dude.
This video is brought to you together with Blinkist. Now, I don't know about you, but I love listening to podcasts and audiobooks when I'm driving to work or when I'm working out, and I love listening to non-fictional books. Now Blinkist have made that really easy for me because they have more than 3,000 non-fictional books in their library, and the real genius with Blinkist is that they take really large works of non-fiction, like hundreds of pages of books, and they condense them down into the most important points, which they call blinks. That means that you can listen to a whole audiobook for maybe 20 minutes, which means that you can listen to 2 books during a workout session, which is absolutely great. Now, a book that I'm listening to now is The History of Almost Everything by Bill Bryson, and it's really good, guys. Those of you who uses this link here below, which is blinkist.com/mentorpilot, will get 1 week absolute for free, so you can check out that I'm not lying to you, and then you'll get 25% off the price if you choose to sign up, so check it out. All right, my friends. So last week I was reviewing the final report of the SmartWings flight 1125, which was ending up flying across Europe after they experienced an engine failure at 36,000 feet. Now that report was littered with very strange decision making and questionable CRM. So I thought today I want to talk about what actually happens in most of the cases out there, which is where really professional, well-trained flight crew actually saves the day when something happens. So Qantas Flight 32 is an excellent example of both how good CRM and how good system management and knowledge is crucial in order to achieve safe flight. Because sometimes your worst nightmares does happen. Sometimes you end up with system failures that you didn't think was even possible. And when that happens, you need all of that knowledge and all of that CRM and utilizing all of the resources around you in order to get to the best possible outcome. So Flight 32 was a scheduled flight running from Changi Airport in Singapore to Sydney. It was flown by an Airbus A380, and it consisted of a quite different flight crew setup. They had 5 pilots in the cockpit, 24 cabin crew members, and 440 passengers on board. The reason there were 5 people in the cockpit was that this was a check flight. So the flight crew was being checked, but not only them, the training captain who was doing the check was also being checked. So you had a check captain and a senior check captain on board. This happens sometimes. When we check out new training captains, it has to be done by a senior training captain. So from time to time, you end up with these kind of flight crew setups. So in the 737-800, for example, I have actually flown with 4 people in the cockpit, which is very crammed for 737. Less so in the case of an Airbus 380. But the thing that you need to understand when it comes to CRM, when you have a situation like this, is that there's going to be a lot of nerves on the flight deck. Right? People are going to be nervous because they're on the check, and also there's going to be questions about what is the actual chain of command when you have 3 captains on board. Now this is where Captain Richard de Crispigny is showing the first sign of what kind of a leader he is. Because already in the bus in towards the airport, and also before they departed, he had a discussion with the other flight crew members about exactly this, saying that this is the chain of command, I am the pilot in command, and then you have your first officer, the second officer, and the check pilots are just sitting there to observe. The only reason they will be interfering is in case of a breach of safety, which is how it works when we do line checks, generally speaking. But it was very, very important that he made this clear, because not only does that relax the cockpit atmosphere, it also shows exactly who does what in case of failure. And that's going to become really important very soon. So the Airbus A380 was now fully fueled to fly to Sydney. They had a normal takeoff and they climbed out, took up the landing gear, took up the flaps. And at about 7,400 feet, the flight crew heard two bangs very close to each other. The aircraft started to yaw, indicating a problem with one of the engines, and the first ECAM message appeared. Now, ECAM stands for the Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitoring System. Full disclosure here, guys, I am not rated on the Airbus, so you'll have to bear with me. But if you think of the ECAM messages as the kind of master caution system that we have on the Boeing, where ECAM, instead of what we get, which is just a general fault message, ECAM actually says what is wrong and what the flight crew should be doing. So the actual action items as well. The ECAM message indicated an engine overheat on engine number 2. That's on the left-hand side of the aircraft. And that initiated the first response from the flight crew. So the pilot flying was the captain. He pressed altitude hold. The aircraft leveled off, and he was expecting the auto thrust to start reducing thrust, because that's what it does in order to try to maintain the airspeed. But here's where the indications of multiple failures started becoming obvious, because the auto thrust did not work. So the captain had to take off the thrust manually and continue to fly. Meanwhile, the first officer, who's pilot monitoring, started handling the ECAM checklist. And the ECAM checklist included reducing thrust on the indicated engine and then wait for 30 seconds to see what happened. Okay? During those 30 seconds, the first officer also made a pan-pan call, which is an urgency call to air traffic control to let them know that they need potential priority and to explain to air traffic control why the aircraft is not following the standard instrument departure. Right. When this was done, the ECAM messages shifted from an engine overheat to an engine fire for a couple of seconds and then back to an overheat, because this is normally how the fire systems work. Okay, there tends to be loops, temperature measuring loops inside of the engines, and the difference between an overheat and a fire is only a temperature difference. So it went briefly into a fire and then back into overheat. This led the flight crew to believe that there was probably a major fault with this engine, and they decided to shut it down. As they shut it down, as expected, they got the engine failure message of engine number 2. However, this was not the only failure message that they got, because unbeknown to the flight crew, what had actually happened was that a faulty oil stub pipe inside of engine number 2 had ruptured, and it had thrown oil into the intermediate pressure turbine, where the oil had ignited and basically shuttered that part of the turbine, which had then wreaked havoc inside of the engine. It had broken through the engine, so it's now an uncontained engine failure, and shrapnel had flown in through about 20 different locations in the underside of the wing and in the underside of the fuselage. That shrapnel had ruptured fuel lines, it had ruptured fuel tanks, it actually caused a fire in the fuel tank that went out by itself, but also, crucially, 2 of the electronic main trunks of the Airbus 380. So the Airbus 380 has redundant electrical systems running to different kind of wire bundles throughout the aircraft. And in this case, this shrapnel had managed to damage the 2 main ones. And when you start to have electrical failures and electrical things going wrong, there can be any number of system failures originating from that. And this is what the flight crew started to see. So instead of the only ECAM message for an engine shutdown or an engine failure in this case, they now had a barrage of ECAM messages. And why is this important then? Well, the thing here, guys, that you have to understand is that an aircraft is not smart. Okay, an aircraft will just tell you what's wrong with it. Or in the 737-800, you will just get loads of different warning lights and warning bells going off. It doesn't tell you how to interpret a multiple failure scenario. Okay? All of the checklists, if you look at the 737 for example, is built on the assumption that the failure checklist that you're reading is the only failure present, not that you have multiple failures that can affect the same system. And why is this? Well, if you think about it, it's kind of obvious. Like, you cannot build checklists for every conceivable scenario. You cannot have checklists that intertwine with each other. So this means, same for the Airbus, that you need to run through each single ECAM checklist, and then you need to use your system knowledge, your situational awareness to build yourself a picture of what's wrong with your aircraft. And this is exactly what this flight crew was doing. Not only now was he working together with his first officer and his second officer, he was also using the help of the senior check captain and the check captain. So utilizing all available resources. All right? If you've seen my video about PIOSI, you will now start to realize what these guys are doing. They're trying to find out what the problem is. They're then utilizing information from their ECAM, from cabin crew, from pilots who are jump seating, which we'll get to in a second. And then, as they are gathering the information, they start selecting what different options they have. So, how are they going to, deal with the failures themselves? How are they going to fly the aircraft? And how are they ultimately going to land? They select option, they execute, and continuously evaluate. So they're following the PIOSI model here to the letter. All right? Anyway, so just to give you an idea of the kind of failures that they were facing, the ECAM messages that were getting included, the green hydraulic system, low fluid and low pressure. The green hydraulic system on the Airbus is one of the main hydraulic systems. The yellow hydraulic system had engine number 4 pump error. There was a failure of the electrical AC bus number 1 and 2. That was the indications that the main electrical trunks had been partially severed. Flight control in alternate low. Wing slats inoperative, so the leading edge devices did not work. Reduced spoiler and aileron control, so less possibility to actually handle the aircraft in roll. Landing gear control and indicator warning. So unsure if the aircraft is going to be able to lower its landing gear normally or not. Multiple brake failures, including anti-skid system on some of the landing gear pairs. And that's going to be important when it comes to checking the landing distance later on. Multiple fuel system errors, including, crucially, the ability to dump fuel. So the electrical problems that they were getting stopped them from dumping fuel, and of course this was just after departure. They were now carrying a lot of extra fuel, which put the aircraft well above its maximum landing weight. Center of gravity messages, there was fuel imbalances started to build up, both because of the engine failure now, but also because of problems with moving the fuel from different tanks in order to keep the center of gravity where it was supposed to be. Auto throttle and auto land was inoperative. Anti-ice systems were not working. Left wing pneumatic bleed leak. That means that hot air from the pneumatic bleeds is leaking into the left wing, which could cause a fire. And then avionic system overheat. And when you have an avionic system overheat, depending on how long that gets, you might start losing crucial instruments. So this is a barrage of things going wrong. Now, here Captain Richard does something that is really indicative of what kind of a leader he was. So when faced with all of these tens or even hundreds of different failures, instead of just focusing on what was not working, he actually started running through the systems that were working. So, okay, so what do we have? What can we do? How is the aircraft actually working? How does it respond to control input? How does the engines respond, and so on? And this is a crucial way of, when you're faced with a multiple failure scenario, to try to just increase your situational awareness, understanding what do you have to work with and what can you do? And this goes through his and the rest of the flight crew's handling of this entire crisis. It's a cool focus on the mission to be done, the objective, what they're trying to achieve, and what kind of tools they have at their avail. So, as they were now dealing with this failure, air traffic control wanted them to go out to an established holding pattern. The flight crew looked at it and asked if they could go to a holding pattern that was specially designed for them, that was closer to the airport, about 30 nautical miles from the airport. And the reason they're doing this is most likely that Richard, the captain, and the rest of the flight crew was thinking, what if this turned into a real catastrophic scenario? How quickly can we get this aircraft down on the ground? And instead of being further away, they wanted to be closer to the airport. About 30 nautical miles is almost gliding distance into the airport. While they were dealing with the different ECAM checklists and they were now flying towards this holding pattern, they sent a second officer out into the cabin. Now the cabin crew had tried to get a hold of them. They'd used the emergency code to try to get in contact with the flight crew. Unfortunately, that has been lost with all of the ECAM ding messages that had been going on non-stop. So the flight crew hadn't heard the cabin crew, but now they were able to communicate them and instruct them on what was going on. As the second officer came out into the cabin, he was flagged down by what looked like a passenger, but it turned out to actually be an off-duty pilot that was sitting in one of the passenger rows. And that pilot showed him on the in-flight entertainment system, there's a camera in the back of the Airbus A380 showing an overview of the aircraft. And on that camera, you could clearly see that there was liquid that was kind of running down the left wing. So that further indicated the kind of damage that the aircraft had. The second officer then went down to the lower part of the aircraft, looked out on the wing, and could clearly see that there were damage to the left-hand wing as well as to the engine. So he came back with that information into the cockpit. They conferred with each other. And during this time, both the captain and the senior check captain made numerous PAs telling the passengers what was going on, that they had technical difficulties, and also communicated with the cabin crew to let them know what was happening. So you have continuous communication, keeping everyone in the loop here, which is lowering the anxiety level. Even though people are hearing that they have technical problems, most of them could actually see that out through the window anyway. So it's much better to hear that, yes, the flight crew is aware of what's going on and they're dealing with it, than not getting any information at all and having rumors spreading. Because when you have 440 passengers, there's bound to be panic breaking out unless this is handled in a good and efficient way. So it took the flight crew a little over 50 minutes to run through all of the hundreds of ECAM actions that they had to do. And while they were doing this, the second officer, together with the senior check captain, was trying to calculate the required landing distance. Because remember, they could not dump fuel. This meant that they were over 50 tons overweight. Okay? And just to get that into perspective, a 737 empty weight is about 43 tons. So they were carrying more than a 737 over their maximum landing weight. Together with the failures they had with not working slats, with problems with the brake systems, all of that, when they put that into the computer, basically the computer couldn't come up with a figure. But as they tweaked it a little bit and they took away the possibility of a wet runway because it was a nice day and it was dry, they managed to come up with a figure that indicated that they would be able to stop the aircraft if they landed bang where they were supposed to be, on speed, with about 100 meters to spare. Okay? So this indicated that they were able to land. They now started to prepare for that. And the preparation consisted of doing a number of flight control checks. So they were slowing down the aircraft in the holding, trying out the aircraft. Now you might wonder, why would you do that? And the key here is that you don't want to end up at low speed, on final, close to the ground, finding out that a part of your flight controls are not working. So doing continuous flight control checks like this is yet another indication that this crew was really on top of things. They asked for about a 20 nautical mile final, which is a good 10 miles or almost twice the normal final. Lined the aircraft up, started to configure it with whatever flaps they could get out. They couldn't lower the landing gear with the normal system. They had to use an alternate extension system in order to get the landing gear out, but eventually the aircraft was lined up for landing. The aircraft flew down. They tried to use the autopilot, but the autopilot kept disengaging a couple of times. So the captain just decided that no, I'm just going to hand fly this, which is probably smart as well, because then you get a little bit better kind of feel for how the aircraft is moving. And as they were decelerating, they continued to do these flight control checks, because an aircraft might be flying great as you are with the flaps retracted and the landing gear retracted, but then if it has sustained damage, as you're extending leading edge device, well in this case they couldn't, but trailing edge devices, for example, if there's damage to them, then all of a sudden you might get a problem with flight controls. And as the speed is decreasing, it's the same thing. So they were continuously checking that, yeah, we have everything under control, as they now descended down towards the landing runway. Meanwhile, the senior check captain told the cabin crew to prepare the aircraft for a possible runway overrun and a possible evacuation, so everyone was ready for that. They landed the aircraft perfectly what it was supposed to. Initially, the deceleration was really slow, probably had to do with the lack of anti-skid on some of the wheel pairs, but eventually they managed with max manual braking to get the aircraft down to a complete stop, about 150 meters before the end of the runway. At this point, since the air traffic control was well informed, all of the emergency equipment started coming up towards the aircraft, and the pilots started shutting the aircraft down. They shut down all of the engines, or at least they thought they shut down all of the engines, and when they shut down the last one, the aircraft went into kind of a degraded electrical mode. But before it did that, they observed that the brake temperature on the left-hand side was close to 900 degrees Celsius and increasing. So the brakes were extremely hot, which was completely normal if you think about landing with 50 tons overweight. But the problem, of course, was that they had seen that they were leaking fuel. And indeed, the fuel was dripping down very close to these white hot brakes and could at any given second have burst into a fire. Right, they knew this. Okay, the first officer asked the captain if he could tell the firefighters to start soaking the area below the brakes with firefighting foam in order to make sure that the fuel was covered with foam and couldn't reach the brakes. The captain thought that was a great idea, so he relayed the information to the firefighters, which did that, and that probably saved them from fire. But now, of course, comes the dilemma. Should you evacuate the aircraft? Okay, you have 440 people on board, you have red hot brakes, and on top of this, it turns out that one of the engines, engine number 1, did not shut down. No matter what the flight crew did, the firefighter said that the engine was still running. The flight crew did everything they could. They pulled the fire handle, they shot the 2 fire bottles into the engine. Nothing stopped the engine from running. So probably there was some kind of electrical fault in the communication to the engine. The engine just kept running. So now you have an engine running, you have white hot brakes, you have a fuel leak on the left hand side, and you have passengers on board. Okay, a less cool flight crew might have just initiated an evacuation to try to get everyone out as quickly as possible. But these guys, they sat in and they discussed both with the firefighters and amongst themselves and said, let's try to disembark the passengers on the right hand side using normal steps. And that's what they did. So they attached one set of steps in the front. The passengers started to disembarking, and that was after an hour of trying to shut down the engine and trying to secure the aircraft down after landing. It took a further hour to get all of the passengers off and away from the aircraft. So this whole ordeal took over 2 hours from when they landed until everyone was off the aircraft. Meanwhile, the cabin crew was ready to initiate an evacuation at any given point. The flight crew said that if we see that there's a chance of a fire or the fire is breaking out, then we might initiate the emergency evacuation, and just start evacuating as normal. But they didn't have to. And because they didn't have to, no one was hurt. So this whole incident, with all of these multiple failures and everything from leading edge devices not working, from hydraulic failures, from uncontained engine failures, didn't lead to a single hurt human being. Okay, part of the engine that had exploded fell down onto an island of Batam. It fell down onto a couple of vehicles and onto a school, but no one was seriously hurt. And they managed to eventually stop the running engine by 2 firefighting trucks just pumping it full with firefighting foam and effectively smothering the engine. And that's how they shut it down. So, what can we learn from this then? Well, you can learn a lot of things. First of all, CRM, usage of all available resources. All of the flight crew and the cabin crew, and even some people that was deadheading with the aircraft, was helping to get as much information as possible to come up with the right decisions to make. Keep yourself cool. Look at what the aircraft can do and not what it cannot do, right? You need to plan for the worst, but you need to handle with what you have, which is what they did. They used a variation of Pyosi, which I've talked about in a previous video, so check out that video if you're more interested. And then, once they had landed and everyone was down and safe, the captain actually went in and talked to all of the passengers, explaining what had happened, how it had happened, and which led this from being a public relations disaster, with social media, everyone is filming, everyone is sending it out on Twitter. Now all of the passengers felt that the flight crew had done a great job, the cabin crew were calm, relaxed, and they knew what they were doing, and this is what was being sent out into the Twitter sphere, all right? They were showering the flight crew and the cabin crew with praise and how it was being dealt with, how they were getting information, how they were being treated, and something that was by all means should be a public relations disaster was actually turned into something fairly positive. Now, the final report is available, and I have links to some of the reports down here and some of the articles that I've used to create this video. But all in all, this is a brilliant example of what flight crew and cabin crew is doing every day out there. Because what you don't understand is that small failures does occur, small things happen, and if they're being left unchecked, they can lead into bigger things. But they're not. The reason you don't hear about these things is because trained flight crew and trained cabin crew and engineers out there are handling it the way that they're trained to handle it every single day, so it doesn't become a headline. Okay, and that's what I want you to take away from this. This is what you should and can expect from your crew on board. Guys, I'm betting that you have questions about this, and I love having your response to my videos and also your suggestions about other videos that I should do about other events that have happened. So if you have questions and you want to talk about it, write in your questions and suggestions here in the comments. Give me a like to the video, share this with friends who might need to see it, and if you want to have more kind of in-depth discussions, well, in that case, get the Mentour Aviation app. It's completely free to download. You have the download links down here, and you can go in and you can have discussions together with me or other flight crew members or aviation enthusiasts. You can also go to mentorpilot.com. Okay, register yourself there. It doesn't cost you anything, but it means that you'll get access to quizzes, technical quizzes about everything aviation related, and also you will know when I create new stuff like courses, for example, that will be coming on the website very soon. And that's also where you can find links to my t-shirts, mugs, and other cool kind of merch that you might be interested in. Have an absolutely fantastic day. Take care of yourself, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentour Aviation app, and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.